Here we're confronted with a very odd story about a pair of non-identical twins, one of whom is born just a moment before the others, and we are told that somehow one of them robbed his father's blessing by his conniving younger brother. The story sounds very strange to us, if not bizarre, because it falls on modern and postmodern ears, as if calling out from a dim, dark past of an ancient time and a place far away, from cultures and customs utterly foreign to us in our thinking. And yet, I believe that many today who are here now know something about what it means to be robbed of a blessing. Particularly a dad's blessing. In fact, I dare say that there are some of you who only too painfully are aware of that longing for acceptance and approval and unconditional love that we so desperately crave for and need, that is within a dad's power to give. And either by its presence or its absence, his inability, or worse, his conscious refusal, he has perhaps left some of you tragically robbed from the priceless blessing that you deserve. Well, dads, grandpas, surrogate fathers, or role models, leaders of our TYF and JMC, small groups, and others. And this includes females also who have been mother figures or surrogate mother figures. I want you to know that you have incredible influence over those that you have touched. You may not think that you have any power, but you do. You have the power of health and happiness, power of incredible hurt, if you wish, and malevolent harm. Power to bless your kids or to rob them of it and withhold it from them. You have the power within your heart by your love and approval and acceptance to change, mold, and make our children into emotionally healthy adult human beings. Or tragically, if you neglect them by non-acceptance, by lack of approval, you can leave your children with a sense of emptiness and yearning that hardly anyone else can ever fill, an emptiness that will follow them through all the days of their lives. Well, in the scripture that's before us, we have a situation, we have an archetypal story, and though foreign to us in customs and culture, yet speaks powerfully with relevance to our lives today. The account of the story takes place in the book of Origins, or Genesis, chapter 27, verses 1 to 41, of which Daniel read some selected verses. Isaac, who has become old, blind, and possibly quite sick, at least he believes he's about to die. Actually, he will live another 40 years. I've said this before, but for about 20 years I've been telling my wife I feel I'm going to die young, and she says it's too late for that, Henry. So Isaac decides that it's time to come to pass on his patriarchal blessing to his successor, the oldest son, older by just a few moments. And in ancient culture, to give a blessing to the firstborn was tantamount to a last will and testament. So much so that it was binding. And once you gave that blessing, you could never take it back. So calling Esau to him, the old man requests that his son hunt and catch some wild game and prepare it for the ceremonial feast and preparation and give him his blessing. All the while, Rebekah is eavesdropping on the conversation, and she devises a slippery scheme to steal Esau's blessing and give it to his younger child, Jacob, who is her favorite. Mama's boy, Jacob, described perhaps symbolically as well as literally, is smooth-skinned. Ingeniously, he disguises himself to both feel and smell like his woodsman brother, even to the point of wearing his brother's sweat-stained hunting clothes and covering his arms and neck with fur to emulate his older brother's excessive body hair. And we are wondering if perhaps, does Esau suffer? Does he perhaps the first recorded instance of hypertrichosis, otherwise named colloquially as werewolf disease? Perhaps, or at least a mild case, or locally realized, or locally present. Well, certainly the Bible repeatedly mentions this unusual trait about Esau, pointing out that even at the moment of his birth, he was covered with red hair. Even the name Esau means red. Genesis chapter 25, verse 25. And the name Jacob in English, in Hebrew, Jacob, and also in English, James. All the three names are the same. It means literally trickster or tricky. Now, don't get any ideas. Don't take my name in vain. And so Jacob, the trickster, disguises himself and enters into his father's presence, and he brings him some, not wild game, but some lamb, and he gives it made up by his mother just the way he wants to do it. The ruse has been set, but one thing the mother and the son pair of schemers have overlooked is the difference between the voice of the two sons. Isaac catches the difference immediately and reacts with suspicion when Jacob identifies himself as Esau and adding, I'm your firstborn, as if to protest too much. A tense moment ensues when Isaac reaches out to touch his son, his hand and neck, and smell the boy's clothes. But Rebekah has taken care of all this, and Isaac is convinced enough to proceed with his blessing. A blessing, mind you, as I said, in the patriarchal age, that can never be revoked or rescinded. Now, part of this has to do with the Hebrew understanding of words. To the Hebrew culture, words have power. They penetrate the walls. They penetrate the souls. They last. So that they would say, in a house where only good words are said, you can almost sense it. And they would also say that if you entered a house, and I believe this, where only bad words are spoken, you can almost sense that too. So they believe that words have a living power in a sense. And that's why words of blessing could never be rescinded. And that explains why later in the story, when Isaac discovers the deception, he says to Esau says to Jacob, Isaac says to Esau that your brother's blessing can never be taken back. And that explains why Esau wails bitterly. And although Isaac will go on and bless Esau, it's not the same. Because the initial blessing has been robbed from him. It's been spoken and can never be taken back. Such an understanding of words sounds strange to us, and culturally it sounds odd to us, and we're worlds apart by millennia. And yet, you and I do know the power of words. Remember when you were children and you were taught to say, sticks and stones can break my bones, but what a lie. Words do hurt. They can sting and echo down your life, especially words spoken by a dad or a mom to his son or her daughter. And over years of counseling people, I've heard again and again people express the thought that they were told verbally or non-verbally by a mom or dad, you were not planned. You were an accident. Or we wanted a boy, not a girl. All of which is to say, we didn't want you. And words do hurt, don't they? Well, let me draw your attention to the actual blessing that Isaac mistakenly imparted to Jacob, but meant for Esau. Rather, that was spoken to Jacob, but meant for Esau. And make a note of the relevance for ourselves. And it's told in Genesis 27, verses 26 to 29. Now, Dr. Gary Smalley wrote a famous book entitled The Blessing, and he notices significantly that the blessing given to Jacob has 4 ingredients that ought to be present in every home. And the first ingredient, he says, is it involves meaningful touch. Let me say that again. Meaningful touch. Verse 26 says that he said, "Come here, my son, and kiss me." Now, that's not an isolated incident in the Old Testament. Almost everywhere, when there's a blessing bestowed in Hebrew culture, it involves touching, the laying on of hands, a familial kiss, an embrace, something that conveys acceptance and love. And so with Jesus. Do you remember in Mark chapter 10 when the mothers brought their children to Jesus? The song used to say, and some of you are too young to remember, when mothers of Salem brought their children to Jesus. And as a young boy, when I heard it, I thought, why on earth are those young mothers going sailing? When mothers went sailing, they brought their children to Jesus. And so in Mark chapter 10, the mothers brought their children to Jesus, and he laid them on his lap, and we were told he touched them. Most likely, he placed his hand on the top of their head, which symbolically was the crown of their souls, and he blessed them. Because Jesus knew exactly what children and young adults all need, and need to be felt as being loved and accepted by a parental figure, so that he touched them and blessed them. And that's important in our homes too. Of course, when they're young, as infants, we cuddle them and we hug them and we hold them close. And then when they're a little older, they climb into bed with us, and especially they feel our warmth on a cold and winter morning. I'll never forget such an encounter in my own home. I'm moving this so that I can see some of you. And I was probably about 4 years old, and my dad always had orange juice first thing in the morning. And my mom said, "Take your dad his orange juice, but don't wake him up." And I was just imagining this 4-year-old boy, the glass is just brimming to the top, and this orange juice, and Dad was sleeping, so I didn't want to wake him up. So I didn't know what to do, so there was no bedside table, so I just took the orange juice and put it on top of his chest, which was going up and down with breathing. And I went back to the kitchen, and all of a sudden we heard this howl coming from the bedroom. And I said to Mom, I just did what you told me. I gave him his orange juice, but if he's not awake, don't wake him up. Much to my mom's dismay and my dad's fury. Well, the point of that encounter that I'm telling about you is that I grew up in a home where we were hugged, and although not always verbally told, we knew that we were accepted. We knew that we could jump in bed with our dad. Well, the point of my story is that we need moms and dads who will hug us and love us and accept us with physical touch. You say, well, I'm not a huggy type. Well, you may not be a huggy type, but there's occasion when you can supervise. I know some of you are not going to like this, but hear me out anyways. With supervision, you can take those little kids and turn your bed into a trampoline. The mother will not like it, but guys, you know about this noble game of play. Or when they're a little older, you need to play catch with them, or play soccer, or you need to wrestle with them on the ground. That's a way of touch, isn't it? And you can, if you're a dad or grandpa, never be too proud to get down on all fours and wrestle with your kids, because they need that touch. And when they're jumping on your trampoline, you might even want to teach them that song. Women, you will not like this. 3 little monkeys jumping on the bed. One fell off and bumped his head. And they'll never forget that song and you playing that with them. And our older children need physical touch too. I hug my big son every day, even though he towers above me. And I hug my daughters when I see them. And grandpas, even if you're in a wheelchair, you can still... Now, if you're not in a wheelchair, you can still get down and play with your kids and play that game, tickle them to death until they cry with giddy laughter. They will never grow out of that need. As teenagers, dads, your daughter, if she doesn't get the hugs and affection from you in a safe way, she will find it somewhere else, and it may be in an inappropriate way. And older sons too. Jacob was 40 years of age when his dad said, "Come and give me a hug and a kiss." And whether you're 5 or 85, you need touch. Just go into a nursing home and pray and hold them by your hand, and they will weep. I guarantee it. Now, the second ingredient of a blessing has to do with the spoken messages of affection and love. Listen to Isaac as he blesses his son in the last part of verse 27. The smell of my son, he says, is like the smell of a field. Now, I suppose in today's urban environment, it would not be a compliment to say, your son, you smell like a farm. But in that time, this outdoorsman, Isaac, who thought his son was Esau, and the smell of the field and perhaps the harvest ready to be reaped. He smelled this smell and he felt so affectionate to him. You know what? We need to communicate our love and affection verbally to our kids. And too often we are quick to criticize and remind them of their mistakes, to say you're not smart enough, you're not good enough, You're not pretty enough. You're not thin enough. You're not enough this. You're not enough that. You're not enough. And those kinds of feelings can last a lifetime. Of course, there's a time and a place for strong correction, but we also need to convey our belief that our children, young and old, are worth something. You have value to me. I love you, and I'm so glad that you are my daughter. I'm so proud of you that you are my son. And don't wait until it's too late. You could say it on your deathbed, and people will cry. One, because you're going to die, and two, because of all those years you never said those words until the last moment. And that leads right into the third ingredient, that a blessing has to do with imparting to them a sense of high value. Notice what Isaac says in verse 28, "May God give you of heaven's dew and of the earth the richness and abundance of grain and new wine." He's saying, you're special. And my wish and prayer for you is that God will give you His very best. And it's important to instill this into our children, young or old. And without it, they can't live an emotionally healthy life, nor will they be able to believe that their Father in heaven actually loves them. Well, the next thing, the fourth ingredient, has to do with picturing a glorious future. And Isaac does that in verse 29 when he says to Jacob, "May nations serve you, and may peoples bow down to you, and may those who curse you be cursed, and may those who bless you be blessed." You see, Isaac is helping his son to see a bright future. And that's an important quality that parents need to do for their children, young and old. So just to recap what we've said so far, according to this pattern in Isaac's words and blessing, there is one, meaningful touch. Two, a spoken message of love and affection. And three, we need to attribute to them a high value of our high value of them. And four, we need to picture a glorious future. These are the ingredients of what we who call ourselves dads and moms and mentors and surrogate dads or moms need to give to young people and young adults. Whether they're 2 or 62, we need to give it to them. I began by saying, while the context and culture of this scripture is far removed from us, the world we know today, even in our world, there are many today who painfully know exactly what it means to be robbed of a blessing by a father or mother. And men and women, you really do have power to make or break your children by giving them or by withholding them the blessing they deserve. But you say, Henry, I don't really understand what you're trying to say. Well, let me give you a couple of scenarios. A 60-year-old businessman. He's got everything, success, wealth. He has a name that's known by many. He has power. And he is striving all his life to get more, and yet he's so empty. He's empty. Why? Because he is unconsciously trying to prove to his dad, who died 25 years before, that he really isn't a failure. Because he was robbed, this man, from a blessing. Or the case of a 30-some-year woman, a brilliant performer in her concert recital as a guest pianist in Roy Thompson Hall in Toronto. And just as she's finished the last note of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto Number 2, as that fades out and echoes, she's interrupted by this thunderous applause. And it's filled to capacity with 2,700 people. And they stand to their feet with ovation, but she doesn't hear the thunderous roar. And she doesn't see the crowd, because the one person she's really looking for is that dad. The one who always said, "This and more will do." She knows what it is to be robbed of a blessing. Contrast this to a 5-year-old girl, I'll call her Eileen. At the sound of her daddy's footsteps arriving after a long day of labor at the mill, as he takes off his old gray battered fedora, and he, like James Bond, he just throws it and it lands on the hook. At that sound, his 5-year-old daughter runs down the stairs, and about the 5th stair up, she fearlessly leaps into her dad's arm. And he tosses her in the air, and he hugs her, and they give Eskimo kisses. They rub noses. And the father says, "You are so beautiful, Eileen." And she says, "I know, Daddy." And Daddy says, How do you know this?" "Because you tell me all the time, Daddy." That was then. She was 5 years old. Now she's 95, and she's covered with wrinkles and graying skin, and little time she has left in this world, and she spends it in a nursing home, mostly by the window, looking out at the flowers and at the birds. But she's okay because of many reasons, but one of them is that she had the blessing she deserved. And those words penetrated her soul. Words of affection and love and acceptance. Her daddy is long since gone, having died in 1944 on the Battle of the North Atlantic. But he still is treasured in her heart and the words he gave her. Now, come to one more scenario. The street number is 215 Emery Street, London, Ontario. And picture, if you will, a man, 75 years of age, and he's lying on that old bed that used to be his kid's trampoline. And now his boys, now men, are surrounding him. And there's his wife, and he's just about to breathe his last breath. He has lung cancer, and he's literally drowning by the fluid in his lungs. And some of his last words are blessing. He says, Sons, I'm so proud of you. I love you so much. And I know that because I was one of those young men. And seeing him die was the most painful, some of you understand that, the most painful moment in my life. But he gave me the blessing. But it wasn't the first time, because in unspoken ways, always, even as children, we knew that we were loved and accepted. And we had the blessing. And you know, I love him so much today, and I miss him. And once in a while, I see him in my dreams. Men, will your children dream about you after you are dust? Moms, leaders, TYF leaders, will your kids dream about you? Will they even remember you after you are gone, or when I'm gone? I want you to know that if you didn't receive the blessing, you can, because God, the Heavenly Father, is the perfect Father that you deserve to have. and He can lay His hand of blessing upon you as His child.